everyone, and welcome to the 2021 virtual Gaithersburg Book Festival. I'm Ed Amar, and my most recent novel was They're Gone, which came out in 2020. I'm also a columnist for the Washington Independent Review of Books, and I host DC's Noir at the Bar series. And I've had the fortune to be a Gaithersburg Book Festival featured author for many years, and I'm your host for today's presentation. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you to support this presentation's authors by purchasing their books from our bookseller partner, Politics and Prose, one of America's premier independent bookstores. You'll find purchase links in the presentation description. Given all we've been through over the past year, it's so important to support local jobs and the local economy, and Politics and Prose is just a fantastic little store. I also want to extend a big thank you to our 2021 featured sponsor, the David and Michael Blair Family Foundation, for their generous support. Okay, let's get started. Today we have with us best-selling author Lisa Scottoline. I'm so excited to have the opportunity to introduce her because as a fellow crime fiction writer, she's just a legend in her ranks. Lisa's latest novel, Eternal, offers a sweeping and shattering epic of historical fiction fueled by shocking true events. Eternal is a tale of a love triangle in the heart of Rome in the creeping shadow of fascism. Unfolding over decades, it's a tale of loyalty and loss, family and food, love and war, all set in one of the world's most beautiful cities at its darkest moment. As I mentioned, Miss Scottoline is a legend among crime fiction writers. She's been a #1 bestseller and Edgar Award-winning author of 33 novels. She has over 30 million copies of her books in print in the United States and has been published in 35 countries. She served as the president of the Mystery Writers of America and taught a course she developed, Justice in Fiction, at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, her alma mater. In conversation with Lisa today is author Stephanie Dray. Speaking of bestsellers, Ms. Dray is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestselling author of historical women's fiction. Her award-winning work has been translated into 8 languages and frequently tops lists for the most anticipated reads of the year. Welcome, Lisa and Stephanie.
We're very happy to be here.
We really are.
I cannot wait to dig into this book. Now, I have read that Lisa has called this novel, Eternal, the culmination of all her life's work. And I want to say, having read this, I don't doubt it for a minute because this is a masterpiece.
Aww.
I love this book, which is a real saga, and that's my favorite kind of historical fiction. And I can't wait to chat about it. But before we get into it, I'm hoping Lisa could just give us an overview of what the book is about, because I think she'll do a better job at it than I will.
You are so well. Thank you, Stephanie, so much. And I'm so excited to be in conversation with you because I cannot wait to read The Women of Lafayette Castle. My best friend has been Chateau Lafayette. Has been raving about this book. And she said, "You're meeting Stephanie." I'm like, "Well, it's virtual." She said, "But that counts." And so she's been raving about it. And the research you did, it's just amazing. These letters you uncovered. So this is really cool. And I would love to hear about it too. We can be in conversation about it. And Eternal, because I'm sure there's going to be similarities. I see that. Right? Are we getting ahead of you? That would be so like me. But so Eternal is the story of a love triangle set in fascist Italy. It's a young girl and 2 guys, and they've sort of grown up as great friends in childhood. And then she finds herself in love with them, and they're in love with her. And the question is, who will she choose? But at the same time, fascism is rising. And it's just how history impacts normal people, which is something I think you've been writing about, since forever.
So I've read that the seeds of this story came to you when you were in college. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I know I'm embarrassed to admit that I should have a picture. It was like 40 years ago. I'm dead. But I was at college at Penn, and I was really lucky. I think I'm the luckiest person alive anyway, but I was lucky enough to take a course with Phil Roth. It was 15 kids in the seminar, and he introduced, can you imagine? It was like taking physics from Einstein, although I'm bad at math. But I mean, like every time he would bring a book in, we'd read a book and he would break it down. And he wasn't, it wasn't very interactive. Like he would just lecture, but it was, which is fine because he's like a genius. So you're like, okay, why does this book work? Why does he have this paragraph? Why this sentence in this paragraph? Why this verb in this sentence? Like go from macro to micro. And it was like fascinating. Anyway, he introduced us to the works of Primo Levi, and who was an Italian Jewish chemist who was taken to Auschwitz and survived during World War II and wrote the incredible memoir, Survival in Auschwitz. So ever since then, I was like, I'm Italian American. I didn't really know about this. And I've been doing research for this, and maybe you can identify with this part because I know nobody does research like you. You're in there with that source material at the New York Historical Society, just trying to figure out what really happened and why this story, I felt like it was a story that needed to be told. And so I told it in Eternal. Finally, it took me a long time to get the nerve up.
Well, I am so grateful that you did, and the world is going to be grateful too. Aww. So what you're going to find out is that you and I actually have a lot in common. And
right.
I'm going to tease this out a little bit. First of all, you have legal training, and so do I. I was a lawyer, but only for 10 minutes. So it does not really count. But I noticed that you said that you were born to write this story. And I have to say that I felt that when I was reading, and certainly in my own work, I have felt that way. I wonder, though, if you can explain how your legal training and your ideas about justice in fiction, which I am fascinated by, how this fit into your novel, and also what role does forgiveness have in justice? Because you have some characters who are fascists, who have an emotional turnaround. And it makes me wonder, what moral responsibility do they have for what happened? And how did you see them, even if later they change sides? So I've given you a whole host of things to talk about.
No. That's so thoughtful and right. And it's interesting because I'm always interested in, as a former lawyer, I probably was longer for 10 minutes, but it felt like 85 years. That's how it is in dog years. It's in lawyer years. Right. And so we have this conventional idea that law leads to justice, but it's very interesting to examine when it doesn't. Not only will law thwart justice, or sometimes the law will itself be illegal. And I shouldn't put that. That's not accurate. It's more like the law itself will perpetrate injustice.
Yes.
So that when I started to learn about fascist, and I felt like you probably did about the women of Chateau Lafayette, which is that you discovered this stuff about Lafayette and he was really enlightened and for women's right. And it's something people should know. And I was kind of looking at this and going, wow, we have this common misconception that, for example, the fascists kind of copied Hitler. And actually the opposite is completely true. And also that the situation in Italy was so unique to it, in that when the fascists rose to power, they enacted anti-Semitic laws that actually perpetrated discrimination. So were themselves immoral. And they set up for when the Nazis occupied what would come later. The true life incident that really happened in the middle of Rome that I felt like you did probably. This wasn't enough known. These characters, this is a story that people should know and would galvanize them. You're like, wow, that is amazing. And your mind's kind of blown. And, as for the moral responsibility, I say to myself, like any novel, and you probably have this too, where you go, we can't judge these characters. To understand them. Right. And I said, and also it kind of bugged me a little that there was this idea that Mussolini rose to power because he made the trains run on time. And that was not my research over 40 years. My research was that it was much deeper. They adored him. They loved him. It was a cult-like following. And then I tried to understand what he really spoke to, and it's sort of embodied in the character of Marco, who is a really great, gorgeous, sexy, hunky cyclist. But he has a secret. He can't read. A modern reader will recognize him as dyslexic. So his self-esteem, especially imagine dyslexia in 1930s Rome, which I had to research, which is so fascinating, like the research you do. You go, what could it have been like back then? And of course, he feels dumb, and it affects his self-esteem. So when Mussolini comes along in fascism and says, oh, you're not dumb. You're very special, merely because you're Italian, merely because you live in the city that built Rome. Like we conquered the whole globe. And by the way, the other thing is that Rome was such a fascinating place because not only it is the seat of Roman Catholicism, but it's also the place, I didn't realize this, but the so-called Jewish ghetto in Rome is the oldest continuously existing Jewish community in Western civilization. Like, what? So when you have that kind of juxtaposition and what happened during fascism and Nazism, you're going to have a really fertile field to talk about all of these concepts. And like you say, readers will bring so much to their morality about it. But to me, my job is to tell the story of these characters who are fictional and make people understand why they are the way they are. And their families too. Like, it's also how their families interact. I mean,
and you did such a great job of this. I mean, I learned so much from this. And one of the parallels, I think, between our books is that I explore Vichy France. It was the unoccupied half of France before the Nazis rolled into it. And they were extremely complicit in the Holocaust. And we like to think that the Germans are sort of unique in this sort of horrible ideology, but there were seeds in at least two other Western nations that often think of themselves as the seeds of Western civilization. Parisian and France thinks of themselves as the cradle of Western democracy, and in some ways they're correct. And yet they also had this history. So reading about this in your book, I thought was extremely relevant and just fascinating to think about, and relevant today, to think about what our role could be. We can't be sort of complacent.
Well, it's interesting. And Italy was so unique in that in the beginning of fascism, it wasn't anti-Semitic at all. And Jews, although a minority in Italy, were very well assimilated. So there was a 50% intermarriage rate. The mayor of Rome was Jewish. There wasn't really, and that's why, in a way, the Jews were right to believe they were safe. And also they sort of thought, well, the Vatican won't let anything bad happen. And so, and in fact, Jews from all over Europe were fleeing to Italy for the same reasons. So when it turned, as best I can tell, and I did have a historian backstop me on this, but I taught myself that it was when he joined forces with Hitler. And that was, and the betrayal of Italy's Jews really made it so much more poignant. And so you can sort of, I mean, we're talking about the historical aspects, but I think this is something that I know you do so well in the Women of Chateau Lafayette, which is that you're still telling the story about people. We're not writing history books,
right? Yeah.
Right? We're telling a really compelling story that's dramatic and emotional and has all of these elements. But we are people that live in a society. And if you want to write a book with a bigger canvas, like you've been doing all this time, and I've come late to it, I was like, oh, I'm kind of nervous about it, quite honestly, never having done it. And I don't know, man. I was like, it took me a long time to be able to feel like, okay, you should try to do it.
Now, as I said, I learned so much about the Holocaust that I didn't know, even after having been immersed in my own research about this. So I thank you for bringing us that knowledge. But I also want to say that you made the medicine go down easy. There's lots of sweet stuff in this book that makes it a juicy story as well. I don't want people to come away with it from this talk thinking that it's dry history, because it is not. Your book has been called a novel of loyalty and loss, family and food, love and hate. And I want to get into all those things, but we've talked a little bit about the hate. Let's start with the love. You said that you had a theory about what went wrong in Italy when Mussolini turned. And what I want to know is, why did you decide to juxtapose a complicated love story against the background of such hatred?
Well, I just thought, first of all, everything is, you hope that everything has an impact. You're correct to point out you're making these choices because it will have an impact. So it's not unintentional. I also had in mind, this is me following Dante, but there's a great, right? Why not? Hey, he knew what he was doing. And he said something like, there's no greater sorrow than to remember in times of tough times, kind of, how sweet it was. Yeah. And I thought that's essentially any novelist's role. So I can't tell you you things were bad. I have to show you how good it was. And Italy is a great place to do that, like France, because I mean, the food, the culture, the art, the music,
we're getting there,
right? I mean, there's so much that's so wonderful. And and I thought these characters are like us in a way. History is something you look back on and you go, oh, well, that's what that was. But when you're in it, you don't realize it's happening. I think the pandemic is a perfect change. Right. Like I'm a little flumpery today because I had my second dose of the vaccine. So, right. Did you know, we didn't know when we were entering this awful period that this is where we were. And that's how people live. And then it turns out that it was history. So that's why I was like, luckily I don't write with an outline. It's like, that's why I'm divorced twice. I don't always plan that well. And so I just had these characters in this situation and let them live day by day over a 20-year period. Of course, I cut out a lot. But I had to just tell their life story while I learned their life story. And hopefully it worked. But the truth is, it sounds cliched, but I put the epigraph at the beginning, love conquers all, because the more I read, especially Primo Levi has a wonderful quote. He said something like, as soon as you start to think people are different from you, you will think they are other. And when you think they're other, you will think they're less than. And when you think they're less than, there will be a camp. Oh. And I thought, right, that's mind-blowing. He said it in an interview. And I thought, that's really true because it is a slippery slope. You don't know when you start hating, but you end up there. And the answer really is to love. And I think the novel kind of proves that. So even though while there's tough times, it's uplifting.
It definitely is. And I'm going to get a little bit writerly here because one of my favorite things about your novel is that the relationships went in directions that I didn't anticipate. I started the book and I thought, all right, I see where this is going. And it did not go there. It did not go where I thought.
I know.
And as a writer, I love to be surprised. And I love to find out that characters have a greater depth than I think they're going to have. You didn't just give us a love triangle. You gave us a full love triangle where there's love on every side of the shape. And that is so moving. I wanted to know, did you know that would sort of play against expectation?
No, I just thought as it started to develop, I said, this would be right. And as you know, from writing characters, right? You're wonderful characters. The last three women telling their stories in Women of Chateau Lafayette, right? They are all each pinging off of each other. And you don't, to a certain extent, you don't really know what they're going to do. They're going to do things that are consistent with who they are. Right. And that's really what it is. So you have some historical constraints, but
I do.
Yes, you did.
But I write about people whose choices I can't always change, even if
right. But that yielded surprises for you because I read about how when you discovered those, I mean, I don't want to give anything away, but those letters, Beatrice's letters. Do you want to talk about that, or are we giving something away?
Oh, we'll concentrate on Eternal. We can talk about the women.
Well, it's amazing. It's so cool. And my friend has been raving about it.
Another thing about the characters that I really just was surprised by and delighted by is that you brought the older characters like Sandro's parents and Marco's father. And even though the story is sort of centered or anchored on the young people who are falling in love in this terrible time, you gave us the older generation too and portrayed them with love and respect in a way that was not stereotypical. I absolutely love that because this was a generation that had already been through a world war.
Right. 5 years later. I mean, wow. Earlier, it's like, wow, it's incredible what they went through. No, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, they'd already lost so much and they had so much more loss to go through. So to me, I felt like you showed a little bit of loyalty even to that previous generation. You said that loss and loyalty was part of this book. Can you talk to me about the importance of loyalty?
Well, it's interesting. I think when you think about loss, the flip side of loss is strength.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of discovered that a little bit when I was looking at the character of Beppe, for example, who's Marco's father, and it was a professional cyclist and fought in World War I and finds himself in Rome. He's a fascist. He's a fascist of the first hour, but he becomes, I don't want to give anything away, but because to me, as you mentioned before, and as Ed mentioned, I started out writing crime fiction, but I broadened out to writing about domestic thrillers, they're called, a story of a family. And that's why a little bit I got the courage to write this, because as people who are writing, as I know, Stephanie, you feel the same way, we would encourage everybody. Like, there's no right way to do it. Whatever you do, whenever you want to do it, you try. So I was like, okay, I have a family orientation. I think we all have a context. So I wanted to have their families in it too. And their families are very much in their lives. I mean, they're not super young kids, they're young adults, but the families have so much to offer. I remember when I thought this, when I was in Rome researching this, and the word, like you have these weird SCT words that come to you. This is English major talk, right? But I thought it's a palimpsest, because you see the palimpsest is when in medieval times, monks would write on the manuscript. And then when they wanted to write something else, they'd have to write over it. So they'd wipe it away, but it would never really go away. And so a palimpsest has come to mean a layer of time made visible. Okay, that's very cool. Because you think, when you see Rome, you'll see, I'm walking through the ghetto, I'll see the Portico di Octavia. The Roman Jews are the oldest Jews on the planet. So you're like, wow, this is stuff that's been here for 2,000 years next to stuff that's 1910 next to stuff. So, right. And then you think, well, the architecture is a palimpsest, but also the people are, the families are. What's a better example of generations of time than a generation? Time made visible is daughter, mother, mother. Right. So, right. That's how I felt. I was in Rome. I was like practically weeping. Also, I ate this pizza that made me cry. I swear to God, a weird thing happened. I ate this pizza. It made me cry. It was so good. I grabbed the waiter and said, dude, it's like a $3 pizza. I'm like in love with this. And it was all came together in that moment. It was the carbs really fed my brain. That's what I think.
Well, that is the perfect segue to the next thing I want to talk about, which
pizza.
is
I can talk about
it's another thing that we have in common is that we're both Italian Americans. In fact, my people are from Chilano, which is an hour away from Chieri, so they were also Abruzzi, like yours. So we're
oh my God. I'm going to buy every single one of your books times 10.
So because we're paisans, this means I can tell you that I have a huge bone to pick with you.
Do it.
All right. This is my only criticism of this book.
Okay.
Your novel called to my Italian foodie, and I gained 10 pounds just reading about the pasta. And I need you to justify yourself about why you were so determined to ruin everyone's diet.
Stephanie, that is not bad news. You live your life, girl. You know that, man. That's how we are. I know. I just was there's pasta making in this book. And I would tell you, you probably had scenes like this from my mother. My mother worked, she was a secretary, but she made homemades every Sunday, and it was like a thing. So Sunday morning, she's throwing flour on a table. Like all of our tables have like flour in every groove. You would think I really learned it, but I kind of didn't learn it because she was so good at it. I was like, her line was only the pilot flies the airplane. And I gave that line to a character because my mother was so good at one-liners. And, you wouldn't even try to make it if she were in the house. So, and also it was interesting and it's sort of a sad counterpoint, but what I really learned when I did so much research is that when you segue into when the war happens and Italy enters the war, the Allied campaign the idea was, I'm simplifying it greatly, but was to bomb the crap out of Italy so that Italy would weaken. Now, so that meant the south of Italy, the major cities, was decimated. There was no more wheat to make pasta. And that, I tell you, when you read the stuff, and I did firsthand stuff too, you see that the Italian population did not think, they thought it was going to be like Ethiopia. It was going to be an easy win, shock and awe, in and out. And there was widespread starvation in Italy. not only among the general population, but then what happens when when Italy surrenders and the Nazis occupy Rome, they actually use starvation. They weaponize starvation.
Yeah.
They tried to starve the ghetto Jews. And so I said to myself, you know that fact. So you think of the Dante quote and you have to go, okay, you have to show plenty. This is a country that lives to eat. Like,
oh, yes, absolutely.
Right? We live to eat. I don't even understand. The people who say, like, I forgot to eat lunch, I'm like, what are you talking about? I wait all morning till it's lunchtime. If it's noon, I'm like, where is my lunch? I'm crazy. It's like, is it almost dinner? I'm going to have dinner as soon as we get off. Like, so there's a dramatic reason for it, even though I just really love pasta. And I'm
all right. Well, then I guess I will have to forgive you for these discussions of gnocchi and bolognese sauce and linguine and clam sauce, which now I'm going to have to make this weekend because I was reading about it in your book and my mouth is watering. So
my favorite. Buy
this book and cook lots of pasta.
And I will tell you something, and this is true of your book club stuff, because I saw your book club stuff. Well, I have my mother's ravioli recipe is on my book club materials, right? Book club materials are so great. I love yours too.
Okay, another thing we have in common, you're an animal lover. I am an animal lover. And there are kitties in this book. They are some of my favorite characters.
Oh my God, you're so nice to say that. I have 2 cats. I have 2 cats and 5 dogs and a couple of chickens and a couple of horses. So I'm nuts. This is what happens when you live alone. You start, acquiring animals and rescuing animals. I rescue a horse. I'm like, what are you doing? But I like the cats. Look. What can I tell you? I think it's also emblematic of Elisabetta. Like Marco and Sandro have a very great family structure. Mm-hmm. It's very complete. Elisabetta isn't so lucky, and not everybody is. And
I think it's a wise idea. You use the cats and Nona to give her some family that grounded her. And I thought you did that so well.
Oh, thank you so much. Because I really didn't even know. I wasn't like, does this ever happen to you where you didn't do it on purpose? Like you'd like to take the credit? Yeah, I'm a genius, really. But what do you do? Does that happen to you?
Sometimes. And I think, the characters tell me I'm not going to do that. No, that might be what you wrote in your plot line, but I'm not doing that. And then I have to figure out, why are they fighting me? What is the problem?
Right. It's fascinating. And sometimes the thing that there's the problem, you go, oh, this is what it gives you. It gives you something better, right?
Almost always.
It's crazy that way. I know.
I think we always know something in the back of our mind.
I'm telling you, sometimes I'm always finding, and maybe this is what's so magical about books and why we both love them so much, that there's always some little left lesson. Like the thing that you're worrying about, like you should look right in the eye because it's going to take you somewhere else. And that's better. Yep. It's crazy. I don't know if we're saying anything comprehensible, but
to us,
a lot of sense to me.
Yes, it makes sense to us. So I was really struck by something that you said about how it took you a long time to be ready to write this book. And this is where I'm going to talk just a little bit about the Women of Chateau Lafayette.
Please do.
The Women of Chateau Lafayette is a book where I wanted to tell another story about a founding mother of America, because I'd already written about Patsy Jefferson and Eliza Schuyler Hamilton. And I wanted to write about our French founding mother, Adrienne Lafayette. But if I had started the story I was going to write then, it would have been all wrong. I did not know enough at that time, and I didn't have the skills yet. So the book actually took me 7 years to research, at which point I realized that the real story I wanted to tell was about this extraordinary castle in France, Lafayette's castle, and the 3 women who were bound by its legacy in 3 of history's darkest hours. That is a complicated story, one that takes place over 3 different time periods with 3 very different women who stories all entwine. There is absolutely no way I could have written that story 7 years ago. Right. And so when I saw you write this, I wondered if it was because you felt you weren't emotionally ready to write it, or if you meant something else. What finally made you know that you were ready to bring Eternal into the world?
Well, when you started Women of Chateau Lafayette, did you feel I'm ready? Like, did you feel ready?
No, I think I was ready to tell Adrian's story, but I didn't have enough of a framework, and I didn't know enough how to elevate that into a more important and resonant story for Americans.
Right. And that's such a fascinating thing, because I think there's something about women and readiness. And I think Sheryl Sandberg said this in Lean In, which is kind of like, we tend to, I'm quite old. And so when I was starting out, especially in crime fiction, I just felt like there weren't a lot of women main characters. I was like, you should just try to do this. Like try. And so there's a lot of failure. There's a lot of false starts. There's a lot of poverty, it's hard. But then finally I sort of have a career and made over 30 years and 33 books, and it takes time. But even doing it, I don't always. So Sandberg says, one of the way women held ourselves back is that we don't feel ready. And that readiness is a little bit of it's a red herring, frankly. It's just the feeling of you're not able, you're not good enough, whatever that is. I don't know. But I said, okay, get ready.
Story, get ready.
And I hope we say that. Tell me if you feel this way, Stephanie, but for people who are watching, there isn't any special school that we went to. We just started doing this job, and I think writing, there's a great expression, writing's a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. I think my writing's better because I do a lot of different kind of writing, and I'm trying to do something different and trying to improve. And the good news is, anybody can kind of do it. So just try. And I love that as a message, because it's so American, frankly. It's so, yes, right. Add to this conversation, add to the national conversation, bring out the story of these women, bring out the story of Lafayette. Tell us about Adrienne. It's all stuff we didn't know, and we might as well give it a go.
And honestly, I was an English minor in college. That was not my training. I don't think you need an MFA or any special degree. I think you do need to read widely.
Agree.
And even if you start writing, even if your writing is good, it doesn't necessarily mean it's marketable just yet. But that's okay, because it can get there. You learn over the course of the business. I knew nothing. I was an idiot when I started writing books. I could tell a story maybe, but how to package it or communicate a pitch line, I had no idea. So
and we get better. Right, it comes with practice. We all get rejected. My favorite rejection letter, I'll never forget, was from a New York agent who said, "We don't have time to publish anybody, and if we did, we wouldn't publish you."
Okay.
I see that guy at Book Expo sometimes. I'm like, "Hi, dude. Remember me? Remember me, honey?" Yeah. So I think that's really true. It just comes with practice, and you get better at it.
I think my favorite rejection was someone said, "Well, you're a good writer, but historical fiction is not for you. You need to find something else to write." And then it sort of made me determine, but that's what I love. So I will learn. I will get better.
Good for you. Yes. I know. I love when you said, you're trying to get things translated from the French, and I'm doing that for this. Luckily, I'm published in Italy, so I said my Italian translator, who's, it's very interesting. Like, she'll always write me notes, and she'll go like, "You said Fruit Loops in a book. What are they?" So I said to myself, this is a translator that will go the distance. So I said to her, "Listen, will you start translating some stuff for me so I give you original source stuff, like about Tullio Levi-Civita." There's real life people in this book, some who were just incredibly heroic stories, who saved Jews like Monsignor O'Flaherty, and who hid Jews in the Vatican. And then there's people like Tullio Levi-Civita, who's lesser known, but was really this brilliant Jewish, he was they call me Einstein of Italy. He was so brilliant that he actually corrected an Einstein paper, and Einstein got really pissed and wrote him back, and then admitted he was wrong. And then they became great friends. And, yeah, right. I can't even add. And then you're like, that's a story that you need to tell about him. So like you say, you find all the stuff's in Italian, and he isn't well enough known. I got to tell his story. I'm proud of that. You got to tell stories, right? It's just amazing that those stories are known now. Historical fiction, though, props to you, because it's a bigger bite. It's a bit of a bite.
It's a different animal. And I have written other genres, so I'm able to say that there's no book that's easy. I've never written any book. But what I will say is that historical fiction has such special challenges that it is a lot of work, and you have to really love what you're doing, and you have to feel a passion for it. And clearly you did. I could tell it was a labor of love, and it just, and of course now I'm in love with it. What I want to know is that when I'm writing a book, I always worry, oh, the reader's going to not like this, the reader's going to think this. And I'm always shocked by the thing that they latch onto, either that they love or that they're really mad at me about, is nothing I would have ever predicted. And I was wondering if any readers had surprised you so far in their many, many 5- and 4-star reviews of your amazing book, if they've been fixated on anything that you did not anticipate.
Well, yeah, it's funny because it's the trial lawyer in me knows that that's true. There's a witness you think is going to be great. You put them in the stand and they suck. And then there's somebody that you think this guy's going to he's going to kill us. And then he gets up there and he's like, what? So I haven't had that experience yet with this book, but I must tell you, when I was writing it, there are things I'm hearing that people like Nona, for example, who's the character that's really based on my mother. So my mother would be so happy because I love her so much and it's so hard to lose her. So to have her in this book. So it's really nice that people like my mother. I'm not surprised, but she's a little salty. So, so she always answers a question. She's not like the typical warm and fuzzy love, but she was very, very loving. And so that, I guess that is the answer to the question. It makes me happy when they're like, your mom's great. I'm like, I know.
She made me laugh out loud because there's a line there where Elisabetta says, that's not very nice. And she says, have you met me?
I thought about that because I was like, would Elisabetta call her out? But Elisabetta has a strength that I really like because I'm not like a call them out person. Like, I'm always like at the lunch counter, like I'm picking the number and everyone's in front of me. And I'm like, Lisa, could you stand up for yourself? But she stands up for herself. And I like that she gives it back and then Nona gives it back to her.
I love that too. And I want to say that one of my favorite little excerpts, it comes towards the end of the book. And you say, war was eternal, but so was peace. And death was eternal, but so was life. And darkness was eternal, but so was light. Hate was eternal, but above all, so was love. And not only is that just beautiful writing, so you show a number of different kinds of love in this book.
Right.
Yes, we do have a romantic love story at the heart of it, but there's so many other kinds of love. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your favorite ones.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say, because first off, I remember writing that and I couldn't decide if it should stay. Hemingway says, write drunk, edit sober. And I'm really tough. Like when I edit, I'm crazy tough. And you learn that in crime thrillers. You got to keep it moving. And I wanted to keep it moving. And as you say, it's hard in historical fiction to know what to leave out and what to put in. And there's so much to tell. But I just said, well, that part made me cry. I was crying when I wrote that. So I said, okay, you need to put that in.
Yes. If it gets you, it's going to get them.
That's right. It's you. Wait, now I forget the question. Was that the question?
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me your maybe your favorite non-traditional love stories in this book.
Oh, in this, there's a lot of love. There's a lot of different forms of love. Yeah. Like I thought these friends love each other. And that's what I kind of love about this love triangle, that it's a little no-win. Right. Which I'm like, why did you give yourself this assignment, Scottoline? This is so crazy and dumb. He's like, now how are you going to make it come out? But it felt real to me. They're childhood friends. So it's not like the boys are going to compete and hate each other, and she realizes she's going to lose a good friend if she chooses one of them. And the parents there's love of country. There's love of friends that really transcends all the awful anti-Semitic laws. That Marco's family stands by Sandra's family. Yep. Even at cost of their life. And I just was at a seminar the other day, a virtual seminar with a Holocaust survivor who was saying so many people, like they saved her life. They hid her in a French convent. Okay. And, those, you're not going to sanitize things. Right. This book takes you there.
Yeah.
But there are both stories to be told. And that's what I wanted to do. It really is about love.
I thought that is amazing. And I loved all the different aspects of it. Even
well, thank you for picking that up. No one's mentioned that.
The friendship.
Stephanie, you're my bestie.
Yeah. The friendships, even in the older generation, it was really touching. And even, Nona's not like a very warm, fuzzy kind of love, but it's there and it's very obvious. And also I thought Elisabetta's strength in being able to love her father despite his alcoholism was another, I think, unanticipated aspect. And I really liked it. I think a lot of authors wouldn't do that. And yet you did. And I thought that was great.
Well, thank you for that. That was a hard one because, as you know, from writing historical fiction, you can't apply a modern sensibility. And, because that's anachronistic. When you have a Corvette going through, the language has to be different. The views have to be different. That's what I encounter with dyslexia. But I thought it's also emblematic about who Elisabetta is.
Yes.
She's accepting, she's open, she's honest, and she loves him. And it was very interesting also to go back and like Grazia Deledda stuff, which is about a woman writer who Elisabetta likes, which honestly is just another way of sometimes I secretly give my characters heroes because that tells you something about the character. Oh, who do you think is great? That tells us who you are.
Right.
And so when I just by chance I had to pick the Grazia Deledda book that was out then. And then it turns out it has an alcoholic in it. And I was like, there is a God and he's looking out for writers who don't outline anything. That's and I just went with it. I'm like, hey, sometimes you get a break and you just got to go with it. But thank you for that.
So I'm told this book was originally 1,000 pages. Now, I know readers are like, oh my God, 1,000 pages. I, however, am not shocked in the slightest. I have also done that. So I write long and I never know what to cut afterwards. And I live in dread of the reviews that are like, it was so great, but if it only could have been like a little bit shorter. And I always want to be like, tell me what I should have taken out. So Lisa, tell us what you cut out, why, educate me, help give me some tips.
Well, this is where I tell you, girl, that this is why we love each other, because I didn't know what to cut and I've never even done that. And here I was, can you imagine writing my first novel of historical fiction, which I didn't honestly thought was not, I wasn't copying to the whole genre thing. I just was like, this is a story about family. Be not afraid. It's about family, love, and justice. This is what you write. But when I've never handed in a 1,000-page manuscript, which my editor calls it, and he calls it night, which we can tell people is really unusual. This is bad. I think I'm getting called to the principal's office. And he's like, I really love your book, says a lot of nice things, but it needs to begin on page 370. So right there, I lost 400 pages. And then when I really just cut, because believe me, I'm queen of cutting. Because Philip Roth told me that. He was when he was going through those sentences, he would say the sentence has to justify itself. And I never forgot that. So whenever I write, I'm like, justify yourself, which is so like queer, like cruel and strange and odd. But that's what I do. And so I cut it. But I think it's difficult when look, The Women of Château Lafayette has a sweep. When you're writing a novel that has a sweep, you want it to sweep. Yeah. And I really love an immersive read. I love the reviews that are saying, I didn't want it to end. And I'm sure I know that's how I'm going to feel about your book, because I like to get lost. I find myself reading a lot more during this pandemic. I want to get lost. I want to get swept away in a book and transported to some other place and escape and just learn about the drama and the facts and the kind of stuff you're writing about. And so I'm fine with it. I think it's a very normal like book. Yours is too. And ain't nothing wrong with that. Like, you get your money's worth, man. I don't like being cheated.
Right? We're giving readers a meaty read.
Substantial. Look, you can't write about a world event, in my case, like the rise of fascism and the Holocaust in Italy. Right? Lawyers will say the word gravamen. That comes to your mind. There has to be, and that was a special for me. and I should point this out really, we're joking around and stuff, but to realize, because when I went back to Italy for one of the research trips, it was on the 75th anniversary of October 1943, which is the event that it really is a centerpiece of the novel. So I met survivors, and I'm at a memorial service, 3 of them. And I realized very much and was very aware of that I had to honor what happened to them. And as a lawyer, as you kind of want justice. Well, where's the justice? And I said to one historian, then I'll shut up, I'm going on and on. But I said to one historian, why was there no Nuremberg? Because it was a war crime. And that's why I think this is kind of crime fiction writ large, honestly. But I just said, why was there no Nuremberg? And he said, nobody wanted another Nuremberg. And I thought, well, that's wrong. One murder is too many. One murder is still a murder.
And we assumed that Nuremberg was taking care of all of them. I never knew until reading your book that there were whole countries where justice was not pursued. Right.
Not at all. And that's wrong. That's just morally wrong. So we get to set it right.
And, you said about the Holocaust, and this is important because I believe this is the track that we're discussing today is historical World War II. And historical fiction in general. When I learned that Lafayette Chateau had served as a hiding place for Jewish children, I actually learned in this little memoir called Saved by the Spirit of Lafayette. This little girl was hidden in Chateau Lafayette. And the title of this book, Saved by the Spirit of Lafayette, made me think, is there a spirit of Lafayette? And what she talks about is that he was a hero of hers, both because his castle sheltered her and because he got involved. And we need to have those memories about the Holocaust so that we get involved and make sure that it doesn't ever happen again.
Right. Exactly.
And so that's why I think, your book is so important and talking about this is so important. I'm so thrilled to hear that you got to speak with survivors. Unfortunately, Giselle Feldman, who wrote Saved by the Spirit of Lafayette, she was alive when I started the book, and I did not feel ready to talk to her. We're talking about being ready. I felt like, I don't know what I'm doing yet. I don't want to embarrass myself. And I believe she has since passed. So that was an opportunity that I missed. So if there are historical fiction authors out there, and I know there are, don't wait. This is a precious generation and a time that is so important for us to pay honor and tribute to.
Right. We have to tell those stories. But you're right, though. I understand your reticence because I didn't approach anyone who didn't really approach me. It's very clear that people who survived, they don't need to relive it for our purposes.
Right.
And we're respectful of that. So we get to tell it in this way. And I think that I felt, and I'm sure you feel the same way, that we can honor them in the novel.
Yes.
And that's what I hope I did. It's the most important thing to me.
Yes, I'm totally with you. So I think we just have a little bit of time. I didn't know if you wanted to read from the novel, or we can talk about what you hope readers take away from the novel.
Oh, let's talk. Talking is better than reading.
Okay.
I really hope they take away that love is the answer. That when I first, when you probably have this too, and I want you to talk too, when we choose what our epigram is, or I don't know, what is it called that the quote is in the front? Whatever.
Epigraph.
Epigraph. Okay, so I'm always collecting quotes, and you don't even know when they just speak to you, and I write them and I put them down somewhere. And when I thought of Love Conquers All, I almost thought, that is not cool enough to put in the front of your novel. I'm just going to be real with you. I felt like this feels like a little greeting cardish. This is not, you're trying to operate on a higher level. This deserves it. And then I just rethought it. And I said, that is a really, it's not trite, it's profound. And as we see, it's impossible. There's world wars everywhere. There's hate around. And it has to be actively combated. And I think that's what Primo Levi was trying to tell us. Before it gets to hate, Well, the answer isn't don't hate. The answer is love. And so that's really the message. That
it's hard because it asks an action from you, not just to stand back.
Yes.
To act in love.
Right. And it's also interesting to me because I think vis-a-vis what we do and what people listening to this do, I really believe that books are kind of an answer, because I think books build empathy, like in...
Oh my God.
Right?
I'm always talking about this.
I thought, right? I know. We need to say this out loud, because I was like, I always think of that great quote, Atticus Finch, he says you need to walk a mile inside. And I thought the way you really do that is when you read a book, because you are in someone else's shoes for 400 pages and you go where they go and you live in their time. If somebody's doing their job, right? And I have noticed that readers, I just think I've been doing this for 30 years. I love my readers. It's sad that we can't be at a signing. I hug them. I know them. They open their hearts. We open ours when we write. Yeah. And you can't travel, certainly not during a pandemic, but it broadens your emotional horizons to read. It just does. You think that too. That's why I love things like this.
And I always say that historical fiction in particular always seems to me like an exercise in empathy, just writing it, because you're having to embody somebody who lives in a whole different world than you do. The history is almost like a science fiction world, as I'm sure you encountered. You had to build a whole world that has disappeared, right, and make it come alive again. And then imagine what it was like to live through that. And you do that very compassionately. And I think that it has made me more compassionate person, having to imagine characters who have sometimes done really terrible things or said terrible things, to understand where they're coming from. And I hope that the exercise has made me a better person. And I think that reading does too. And so I hope that the writers and readers listening to this don't shrug that off. Embrace that. When we say, love is the answer, isn't that part of it?
Right. That's really true. I know there's a part, I don't think I'm giving it away, and I didn't realize it until I was writing it, because I went through this whole thing. When you open the book, they're all fascists. You had to be a fascist, but they were. And I was like, part of it, Marco says at some point, they're just people who believed in the wrong thing. And that's a good way to think about it, because it's not judgmental. It is the wrong thing. You can think it's the wrong thing, but there are people who just believed in the wrong thing. And that happens throughout history to all sorts of horrible effect. But you need to understand that it begins with a person, and you need to understand why that is so. And that the answer, as you say, it's an act of love. Yes.
You showed that part of the reason that if they believed in the wrong thing, and you did this so effectively, is that they were so absorbed in, well, it won't happen to me. It's not happening to me. Why should I be worried about it? Or challenge my own beliefs because it's not my experience.
And I do think there's a lot of people who, people change. That's what I liked about reading this too. I've never written a book, a thriller. And I love writing thrillers. It's over like a 3-day period. You see an arc of a character, and you have all sorts of constraints. What are the forensics? You often have to solve a murder, like a real murder, that's hard. I'm telling you, that's hard. I'm like, what am I doing? But this is a 20-year time period. So you do get people, they're going to change over time. My views are very different than they were 20 years ago, and they will change again. And I think especially readers, their minds are nimble. They're open to new things. They read it and it challenges them. And it's, a book, it's so intimate. It's not like something, it's just, right? You just go, oh, that's kind of true. If you're open to it. And I think people who read are open to it. I feel so lucky, don't you, to have a life in books. That's how I feel. It's so great that the book festival does this. I mean, I can't wait to do it in person. It'll
does.
be so fun.
And I know that, I could talk to you all day. I've had such a great time.
I know, I want to have dinner. We got to have dinner. We got to have some pasta together.
I know. And we both talk with our hands. So I'm going to wave to the audience and say that, unfortunately, it's time for us to wrap up. But please be in touch with Lisa and I on our websites. And please go get this amazing book. You're going to love it. Thank you.
And the Women of Chateau Lafayette. I cannot wait to read it. I own it and I can't wait to read it.
That was awesome. I have seen so many virtual events over the past year, and prior to that, in-person events, and that was just so informative and lovely and warm. That was one of my favorite discussions I've ever seen. Thank you so much.
And props to Stephanie. Like, wow, really thoughtful questions. This is what happens when authors interview. You're like, oh, wow, I better have an answer for that.
I had to force myself to not chime in because I'm a man and that's what we do, and say like, I feel you. I know. It was so good. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you, Ed. We appreciate it.
And I want to thank everybody who's watching for joining us for this presentation. As a reminder, we have an amazing lineup of programs for both adults and children throughout the month of May. Please go to Gaithersburg.bookfestival.org and look over the schedule, and you can plan out your festival month accordingly. And before you go, we have a special message to you from the amazing author and bookstore owner, Ann Patchett, and her dog, Sparky. He doesn't say as much as she does, I believe. Enjoy, everyone.
I'm Ann Patchett here at Parnassus Books with my dog Sparky, and I want to tell you the importance of supporting your local independent bookstore, Politics and Prose. They are a remarkable partner with this book festival. Now, when a book festival is live, it's really easy. You just go to the table and you buy your book and then you go to the event. But when a book festival is virtual, it gets a little trickier because you're home and you might think, well, I'll just buy the book on Amazon. So I'm here to tell you, don't buy the book on Amazon. For one thing, Jeff Bezos has enough money, right? He's trying to colonize the moon or something. He doesn't need anything that you've got. Politics and Prose, on the other hand, they're your local independent bookstore, and you love them, and they bring you so many events. They work harder than any bookstore I know in their community. And if you want them to be there alive and healthy and well when all this is over, you actually need to support them. They are the people that are putting a tax base in your community, okay? So you have teachers and police officers and firefighters, and when you pay a couple dollars more for a book, you're creating jobs in your community. So enjoy your book festival, support Politics and Prose. Remember, Ann Patchett and Sparky think it's the thing to do. Shop local. Thank you.